On a calm Saturday afternoon, the city buzzed with its usual energy. The streets were alive with people rushing to their destinations, while others enjoyed a leisurely stroll under the warm sun. Nestled in the heart of downtown was an upscale restaurant known for its cozy ambiance and exquisite menu. Inside, sunlight streamed through large windows, casting soft golden rays over polished wooden tables and elegant chairs. It was here that the story began, a story no one could have anticipated. At one of the corner tables sat a well-known judge, respected for his sharp mind and dedication to justice. Despite his stern reputation in court, he was a devoted family man who cherished moments away from work. Today he had chosen this spot to spend quality time with his wife. Life had been hectic lately, filled with endless hearings, late-night meetings, and piles of legal documents. This lunch was meant to be a break, a chance to reconnect and simply enjoy each other's company. The judge's wife exuded grace and kindness. She was someone who always put others first, whether it was her husband, their children, or friends in need. Her presence brought warmth to any room, even though life as the spouse of a prominent judge wasn't easy. Public attention often followed them, making privacy a rare luxury. But today they weren't thinking about any of that. They laughed softly, sharing stories and savoring the delicious food served by the attentive staff. As they chatted, a figure approached their table. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The person carried a tray with 2 steaming cups of tea, seemingly offering refreshments. Waiters frequently checked on guests at this restaurant, ensuring everyone felt welcomed and cared for. However, something about this individual felt different. Their movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, and their eyes darted around the room as if scanning for something, or someone. Before the couple could fully process what was happening, the stranger leaned forward. With a swift motion, they poured one of the scalding hot cups of tea directly onto the woman's face. Time seemed to freeze. For a split second, there was complete silence, followed by a piercing scream that shattered the tranquility of the restaurant. The woman clutched her face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she cried out in agony. The skin on her cheek and neck reddened instantly, raw and blistering from the intense heat. Panic erupted across the room. Gasps echoed as diners turned toward the commotion, unsure of how to react. Some froze in shock, while others sprang into action, rushing to help. The judge, overwhelmed with fear and anger, shouted for assistance. He grabbed napkins and pressed them gently against his wife's wounds, trying desperately to ease her pain. His hands trembled as he called out for water, ice, anything to soothe the burning sensation consuming her face. Amid the chaos, the perpetrator stood still for a moment, watching the scene unfold with an unsettling expression. There was no sign of regret, no hint of panic. Instead, their face remained eerily calm, almost detached, as if they were observing a distant event rather than the aftermath of their own actions. Then, without uttering a word, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The restaurant staff scrambled to regain control, ushering shocked patrons to safety and calling emergency services. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, quickly assessing the situation before loading the injured woman into an ambulance. As sirens wailed in the background, questions swirled in everyone's minds. Who was this mysterious person? Why had they targeted the judge's wife? And perhaps most chilling of all, was this random violence or part of something far more sinister? For now, answers remained elusive. All anyone knew was that a peaceful afternoon had transformed into a nightmare, leaving behind trauma and unanswered questions. Little did they realize this incident would set off a chain of events that would unravel secrets, challenge perceptions, and test the strength of those involved. The ambulance sped through the streets, its siren cutting through the afternoon calm. Inside, the injured woman lay on a stretcher, her face wrapped in cool compresses to ease the burning pain. Her husband sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, his knuckles white with tension. He tried to stay strong, but his eyes betrayed the storm of emotions raging within: fear, anger, guilt, and helplessness. Every time she winced or let out a soft moan, It felt like a knife twisting in his chest. At the hospital, doctors sprang into action. They gently removed the makeshift compresses and examined the damage. The burns covered a large part of her cheek and extended down to her neck. It was clear this would require more than just basic first aid. "We need to stabilize her immediately," one doctor said firmly as nurses prepared for what lay ahead. Painkillers were administered, and discussions began about the next steps: cleaning the wounds, preventing infection, and planning reconstructive surgery. As the medical team worked tirelessly, news of the attack spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with posts, some sharing blurry photos taken by diners at the restaurant, others speculating wildly about who might be responsible. Journalists descended upon the scene, interviewing witnesses and piecing together fragments of the story. Within hours, headlines blared across newspapers and TV channels. "Wife of prominent judge attacked in broad daylight." The public reaction ranged from shock to outrage. How could such a thing happen in a crowded restaurant? Why target someone who wasn't even directly involved in controversial cases? Back at the restaurant, investigators combed through every detail, searching for clues. Security cameras captured the moment of the attack, showing the stranger calmly approaching the table, pouring the tea, and then walking away without hesitation. But something else caught their attention. A brief exchange between the perpetrator and a member of the restaurant staff earlier that day. Was this truly a random act, or had someone inside the establishment played a role? Employees were questioned one by one, revealing simmering tensions behind the scenes. A server confessed that morale had been low lately due to disputes over wages and layoffs. Management had recently fired several workers, citing budget cuts, but rumors swirled that favoritism played a part. Some staff members resented the way certain people were treated better than others, creating an atmosphere ripe for conflict. Could this have been an act of revenge against the judge, disguised as personal violence? Meanwhile, the judge wrestled with his own thoughts. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, he replayed the incident over and over in his mind. Had he missed warning signs? Could he have done something to protect his wife? These questions haunted him, gnawing at his sense of responsibility. As much as he wanted to believe this was a random attack, deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that it might be connected to his work. Over the years, he had presided over countless high-profile cases, many of which stirred controversy. Had someone decided to strike back, not at him, but at those closest to him? By evening, the initial shock began to give way to determination. The judge made phone calls, rallying support from colleagues and friends in law enforcement. If this was indeed retaliation, he vowed to find out who was behind it and bring them to justice. But as he spoke with investigators, a troubling realization dawned on him. This wasn't just about punishing the attacker. It was about understanding why. What message were they trying to send? And how far were they willing to go? In another part of the city, the injured woman lay in her hospital bed, drifting in and out of sleep. The pain medication dulled the physical ache, but her mind remained restless. She kept replaying the moment when the hot liquid hit her face. The searing heat, the unbearable sting, the sheer disbelief that someone could do such a thing. Who was that person? Why had they chosen her? These questions swirled in her thoughts, refusing to let her rest. Her husband entered the room quietly, pulling up a chair beside her bed. Seeing her bandaged face broke his heart all over again. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, though he already knew the answer. She managed a weak smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be okay," she said, though both of them knew recovery wouldn't be easy. Beyond the physical scars, there was the emotional toll, the fear, the uncertainty, the lingering trauma of being attacked so violently. As they talked, she mentioned something that sent chills down his spine. "Do you remember hearing about that other case a few months ago?" she asked hesitantly. He frowned, unsure where she was going. "What case?" he replied. She explained how she'd read about a similar incident involving hot liquid being thrown at someone in public. At the time, it hadn't registered as significant, but now, lying here, it seemed eerily familiar. Could these two events be linked? Was this part of a larger pattern? The idea weighed heavily on both of them. If true, it meant the attack wasn't isolated. It was part of something bigger, something calculated. Whoever was behind it wasn't acting alone or impulsively. They were methodical, choosing their targets carefully and striking where it would hurt most. For the judge, this revelation added a new layer of urgency. Protecting his family was no longer enough. He needed to uncover the truth before anyone else got hurt. That night, as the city fell silent, the couple found solace in each other's presence. Despite everything, they clung to hope. They knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with surgeries, therapy, and unanswered questions. But amidst the pain and confusion, one thing was certain. They weren't going to let this break them. Together they resolved to fight back, not just for themselves but for everyone affected by senseless violence. Little did they know, their journey was only beginning. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, doctor consultations, and sleepless nights. The injured woman began the long and painful process of healing, both physically and emotionally. Her burns required constant care. Dressings, changed multiple times a day, ointments applied to prevent infection, and medications to manage the pain. Each step forward felt like 2 steps back, as every movement brought fresh waves of discomfort. Yet despite the agony, she refused to let despair take over. She clung to small victories, a little less swelling here, a faint sign of improvement there. Her husband stayed by her side as much as he could, juggling his responsibilities at work with his role as caregiver. He brought her favorite books, played soothing music, and tried to keep her spirits up with stories from their past. But even in his efforts to remain strong, cracks began to show. Late at night, when the hospital corridors grew quiet, he would sit alone in the dimly lit waiting room staring into space. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Who was behind this? Why had they chosen her? And most hauntingly, what if it happened again? Meanwhile, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Security footage from the restaurant revealed more than just the chilling act itself. It showed the perpetrator arriving earlier that day, seemingly blending in with other customers. They appeared calm and unremarkable, yet their actions suggested precision and intent. One detail stood out, the way they exchanged a brief nod with a staff member before heading toward the table where the judge and his wife sat. This subtle interaction raised suspicions. Was it coincidence or part of a larger plan? Digging deeper, detectives interviewed employees who had been on duty that afternoon. Some spoke reluctantly, fearing retaliation, while others opened up about growing tensions within the restaurant. Layoffs, unfair treatment, and favoritism had created an undercurrent of resentment among the staff. One server admitted overhearing heated arguments between management and disgruntled workers. People were upset, they said cautiously, but I never thought it would go this far. As the investigation unfolded, another lead emerged. A former employee came forward claiming knowledge of suspicious activities leading up to the attack. According to them, rumors had circulated about someone pressuring workers to carry out tasks they didn't fully understand. These tasks often involved targeting specific patrons, though the reasons remained unclear. The whistleblower hesitated to reveal too much, afraid of becoming the next victim, but their account added weight to the theory that this wasn't a random act. It was premeditated. Back at home, the couple grappled with the reality of their situation. The wife's injuries meant months of recovery ahead, including multiple surgeries to repair the damage. Doctors warned her that scarring might be permanent, a reminder etched into her skin for the rest of her life. For someone who valued her appearance not out of vanity, but as a reflection of her confidence, this was devastating. She spent hours staring at her reflection in the mirror, struggling to reconcile the person she saw now with the one she used to be. Her husband noticed the change in her demeanor. She became quieter, withdrawing into herself whenever the topic of the attack arose. Determined to help, he encouraged her to talk about her feelings, assuring her that whatever she was going through was valid. "We'll get through this together," he promised repeatedly, though doubt lingered in his voice. Deep down, he worried about the toll this trauma was taking on her mental health and whether she'd ever truly recover. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, she finally broke her silence. "Do you think we'll ever know why this happened?" she asked softly, her gaze fixed on the floor. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Truthfully, he didn't have an answer. All he could do was hold her hand and offer what little reassurance he could. "We're doing everything we can to find out," he said gently, "and no matter what happens, we'll face it together." Their conversation shifted to the idea of seeking justice, not just for themselves, but for others who might fall prey to similar attacks. Inspired by her courage, the husband reached out to advocacy groups specializing in victims' rights. He learned about organizations dedicated to supporting survivors of violent crimes, helping them navigate legal systems and rebuild their lives. This gave him hope. Perhaps, through their shared experience, they could turn tragedy into purpose. During one particularly grueling physical therapy session, the wife met someone whose story resonated deeply with hers. Another survivor, a young man scarred by acid thrown during a street altercation, shared his journey of resilience and self-discovery. Hearing his words reignited a spark within her. If he could overcome such adversity, so could she. Slowly, she began opening up to others, sharing her own struggles and finding strength in community. At the same time, investigators uncovered a crucial link between the restaurant attack and a broader pattern of violence. Digging through old case files, they discovered reports of similar incidents across the city, all involving hot liquids and unsuspecting victims. What initially seemed isolated now pointed to a disturbing trend. Someone, or some group, was orchestrating these attacks, using ordinary people as pawns in a twisted game. Motives remained unclear, but one thing was certain. This wasn't about personal vendettas. It was something far darker. For the judge, this revelation only deepened his resolve. He poured himself into the investigation, collaborating closely with law enforcement and pushing for answers. Every clue, no matter how small, brought them closer to unraveling the truth. And as pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, he realized this wasn't just about catching a criminal. It was about exposing a system that allowed such acts to happen and ensuring it never happened again. As weeks turned into months, the couple found themselves navigating uncharted territory. Their lives had been irrevocably changed, but amid the pain and uncertainty, they discovered newfound resilience. Together, they vowed to fight, not just for justice, but for a future where no one else would suffer as they had. Little did they know, the hardest battles still lay ahead. As the weeks dragged on, the injured woman began to settle into a new routine, one defined by doctor visits, therapy sessions, and endless patience. Her days were filled with small victories and setbacks, each step forward requiring immense strength. The physical scars on her face were slowly healing, but the emotional wounds ran much deeper. She found herself questioning everything: her confidence, her place in the world, even her ability to trust others again. It was as if the attack had stripped away not just her skin, but parts of her identity. Her husband watched helplessly as she struggled to reclaim pieces of her old self. He tried to be supportive, offering words of encouragement whenever he could. But sometimes, silence spoke louder than any reassurance. There were moments when she would sit by the window, staring out at the world outside, lost in thought. He knew she wasn't just looking at the trees or the sky. She was grappling with questions that didn't have easy answers. Why had this happened to her? Would things ever feel normal again? Meanwhile, investigators continued their relentless pursuit of the truth. The connection between the restaurant attack and other similar incidents grew clearer with every passing day. Evidence pointed to a disturbing trend. These weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully planned assaults designed to send a message. But what message? And who stood to gain from sowing fear and chaos? One breakthrough came unexpectedly, during an interview with a former employee from the restaurant. The man, hesitant at first, revealed details about a shadowy figure who had been seen meeting with certain staff members shortly before the attack. He never said much, the whistleblower explained, his voice trembling. But he made promises, money, protection, you name it. All they had to do was follow instructions. When asked why anyone would agree to such a dangerous task, the man sighed. Desperation makes people do things they wouldn't normally consider. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. They realized they weren't dealing with a lone perpetrator but rather an organized network, a group, pulling strings from behind the scenes. Digging further, detectives uncovered links to underground forums where individuals discussed ways to exploit vulnerabilities in society. These groups thrived on creating disorder, targeting high-profile figures indirectly to expose perceived flaws in power structures. To them, the judge's wife wasn't just a victim. She was a symbol, an instrument used to make a statement. Back home, the couple faced another challenge, navigating life under constant scrutiny. News outlets continued to cover the story, speculating wildly about motives and suspects. Friends and acquaintances called regularly, some genuinely concerned, others merely curious. Strangers approached them in public, offering unsolicited advice or sharing stories of their own misfortunes. While well-meaning, these interactions often left the couple feeling drained and exposed. To cope, the injured woman decided to take control of her narrative. With her husband's support, she began journaling her thoughts and experiences, pouring her emotions onto paper. Writing became a form of therapy, allowing her to process the pain and confusion in a way conversations couldn't. Slowly, she started sharing snippets of her journey online, posting anonymously at first. The response was overwhelming. Messages of solidarity poured in from people around the world who had faced similar struggles. For the first time since the attack, she felt less alone. Encouraged by this newfound sense of community, she took another, bold step, reaching out to journalists willing to tell her side of the story. Together, they crafted an article that humanized her experience, focusing not on the violence itself, but on the resilience required to overcome it. The piece struck a chord with readers, sparking discussions about victim blaming, societal pressures, and the importance of empathy. Suddenly, she wasn't just a headline. She was a voice, advocating for change. Her husband, inspired by her courage, threw himself into the legal battle with renewed vigor. He worked closely with law enforcement, pushing for stricter measures to hold perpetrators accountable. At the same time, he advocated for better protections for victims, urging lawmakers to address gaps in existing systems. His efforts earned him both praise and criticism. Some accused him of using his position for personal gain, while others applauded his commitment to justice. Through it all, he remained steadfast, knowing that true fairness meant standing up for those without a voice. Despite their progress, shadows still loomed over their lives. Fear lingered in quiet corners, manifesting in unexpected ways. The sound of footsteps outside their door made the injured woman flinch. A knock at the window sent her heart racing. Even in crowded places, she felt uneasy, constantly scanning faces for signs of danger. Nightmares plagued her sleep, forcing her to relive the attack over and over again. Her husband did his best to comfort her, staying awake until she drifted off, holding her hand tightly whenever she woke up screaming. Yet, amidst the darkness, there were glimmers of hope. Physical therapy sessions became opportunities to celebrate tiny milestones, flexing facial muscles without wincing, smiling without pain. Support groups introduced her to others walking similar paths, reminding her that healing wasn't linear, but possible nonetheless. One survivor, a mother of two who had endured years of recovery after a car accident, shared wisdom that resonated deeply. You don't have to be whole to move forward. Sometimes broken pieces can create something beautiful. These words stayed with her, fueling her determination to rebuild her life. She started volunteering at a local shelter, offering companionship and guidance to women recovering from trauma. Helping others gave her purpose, shifting her focus from what she had lost to what she could give. In turn, her husband joined advocacy organizations, speaking publicly about the need for systemic reforms. Together, they transformed their pain into action, channeling their energy toward making the world safer for everyone. As autumn leaves began to fall, painting the city in hues of gold and crimson, the couple reflected on how far they'd come. Life hadn't returned to normal, and perhaps it never would, but they had adapted. They learned to find joy in simple moments. A shared laugh over breakfast, a quiet walk through the park, the warmth of holding hands. These small acts of connection reminded them of what truly mattered. Still, unanswered questions lingered in the air. Who was behind the attacks? What drove them to cause such harm? And most importantly, how could they ensure no one else suffered the same fate? For now, closure remained elusive, but the couple refused to let uncertainty define them. Instead, they chose to focus on the present, cherishing each day as a gift. Because even in the face of unimaginable adversity, they had discovered something powerful, the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The weeks turned colder as winter approached, and the city began to dress itself in layers of fog and frost. For the injured woman, this season brought both challenges and unexpected moments of clarity. Her recovery was far from over. Each day still demanded resilience, but she found herself growing stronger, not just physically but emotionally. The burns on her face were healing, though scars remained as reminders of the pain she had endured. Some days, looking in the mirror felt like staring at a stranger. Other days, she saw a fighter staring back. Her husband noticed these shifts in her mood and did his best to support her through them. He learned to read the signs, the quiet sighs when she thought no one was watching, the way her fingers traced the edges of her scars absent-mindedly. On tough days, he suggested taking short drives to escape the confines of their home, even if it was just to grab coffee or sit by the park. These outings became lifelines, offering a temporary reprieve from the weight of everything they'd been through. Meanwhile, investigators closed in on the group responsible for the attacks. Evidence mounted, painting a clearer picture of how these crimes were orchestrated. It wasn't just about targeting individuals. It was about sending a message. The shadowy organization behind the violence thrived on chaos, exploiting societal fractures to expose what they called hypocrisy among those in power. To them, judges, politicians, and influential figures weren't untouchable. They were symbols of systems they sought to dismantle. Detectives uncovered chilling details about the group's methods. They recruited vulnerable people, promising money or protection in exchange for carrying out specific tasks. Many recruits didn't fully understand the consequences of their actions until it was too late. Once involved, they were trapped, fearing retaliation if they tried to back out. This web of manipulation extended beyond the restaurant attack, linking similar incidents across different cities. Each act of violence was designed to shock, to provoke outrage, and ultimately to destabilize trust in authority. For the judge, this revelation hit hard. As someone who had dedicated his life to upholding justice, the idea that his work could be twisted into a tool for harm shook him deeply. He wrestled with guilt, wondering if he could have done more to prevent the attack. But instead of letting despair consume him, he channeled his frustration into action. He joined forces with advocacy groups, pushing for reforms that addressed not only the perpetrators, but also the root causes of such behavior: poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity. At the same time, the injured woman continued to reclaim her voice. Her online posts gained traction, resonating with people who admired her honesty and vulnerability. Strangers reached out to share their own stories of survival, creating a ripple effect of solidarity. Encouraged by this response, she decided to take another step, speaking publicly at a community event hosted by a local nonprofit. Standing before an audience for the first time since the attack was daunting, but she knew it was something she needed to do, not just for herself, but for others who might feel silenced by trauma. The night of the event arrived and nerves buzzed in the air. She walked onto the stage slowly, gripping the microphone stand for support. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice steadied as she began to speak. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she admitted, pausing to gather her thoughts. "When it happened, I felt broken, like a part of me had been taken away forever. She described the physical pain, the emotional toll, and the long road to recovery. But then, her tone shifted. What I've realized is that healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about finding strength in who you are now. The room fell silent as she spoke, her words striking a chord with everyone present. When she finished, applause erupted, a wave of admiration and gratitude washing over her. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as a victim but as a survivor. Her husband watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest. He knew this moment marked a turning point, not just for her but for their family. However, the fight was far from over. Investigators identified several key members of the shadowy organization, leading to arrests in multiple locations. But dismantling, the network proved more complicated than anticipated. Every clue unraveled new threads revealing connections to broader criminal activities. Law enforcement agencies collaborated, pooling resources to tackle the issue head-on. Yet the deeper they dug, the more evident it became that this wasn't just about punishing individuals. It was about addressing systemic issues that allowed such groups to thrive. Back at home, the couple faced another challenge, dealing with public attention. While some praised their efforts, others criticized them, questioning whether they were using the tragedy for personal gain. Social media comments ranged from supportive messages to harsh accusations, forcing them to navigate a minefield of opinions. At times it felt suffocating, but they refused to let negativity derail their mission. Instead, they focused on what mattered most, helping others heal and advocating for meaningful change. Their journey took another unexpected turn when a former member of the organization came forward, seeking redemption. This whistleblower provided crucial information, shedding light on the inner workings of the group. According to them, the attacks weren't random. They were calculated moves aimed at destabilizing trust in institutions. The goal wasn't simply to hurt individuals, but to create fear and division within society. Hearing this confirmed what the couple had suspected all along. The attack was never personal. It was strategic. Despite the grim reality, the couple found hope in the whistleblower's decision to come forward. It showed that even those entangled in darkness could choose to step into the light. Inspired by this act of courage, they redoubled their efforts, working tirelessly to ensure justice was served. Together, they attended court hearings, gave interviews, and supported other victims coming forward with their stories. Their shared purpose strengthened their bond, reminding them why they had vowed to fight back in the first place. As snow began to blanket the city, signaling the arrival of winter, the couple reflected on the past year. So much had changed. They had faced unimaginable pain, navigated uncharted territory, and emerged stronger than before. The scars remained, both visible and invisible, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they symbolized resilience, proof that even in the darkest moments there is always a path forward. Still, questions lingered. Would the arrests bring true closure? Could they ever fully erase the fear that lingered in quiet corners? And perhaps most importantly, how could they ensure that others wouldn't suffer the same fate? For now, answers remained elusive. But one thing was certain: they had each other, and together they would continue to push for a better future. A future where no one else had to endure what they had. As winter deepened, the city seemed to hibernate under a thick blanket of snow. Streets were quieter and life moved at a slower pace. But for the injured woman and her husband, there was no rest. Their days continued to revolve around recovery, advocacy, and the ongoing investigation into the shadowy organization behind the attacks. Each morning brought new challenges, but also opportunities to rebuild, not just their lives, but their sense of purpose. The injured woman's public speaking engagements became more frequent. What started as a single event had grown into something larger, a platform where she could share her story and inspire others. At first, standing in front of crowds made her anxious, especially when people stared at her scars or whispered among themselves. But over time, she grew comfortable with the attention, realizing that her vulnerability resonated with others. She spoke about survival, resilience, and the importance of finding strength in community. Her words weren't polished or rehearsed. They were raw, honest, and deeply human. Her husband accompanied her to these events, watching proudly as she transformed before his eyes. The once hesitant woman who avoided mirrors now stood confidently on stage, addressing hundreds of strangers without flinching. He noticed how her voice carried conviction, how her presence commanded respect. It reminded him of the person she had always been, strong, compassionate, and determined, but with a newfound edge forged by adversity. Together, they represented not just a couple recovering from tragedy, but a united front against injustice. Meanwhile, investigators made significant progress in dismantling the organization responsible for the attacks. Arrests spread across multiple cities, targeting key members involved in planning and executing the assaults. Evidence poured in from raids, interrogations, and digital forensics, painting a disturbing picture of a well-structured network operating in secrecy. These individuals weren't mere criminals. They were ideologues driven by a warped vision of societal reform. To them, violence wasn't an end. It was a means to expose what they saw as hypocrisy and corruption. For the judge, this revelation forced him to confront uncomfortable truths. As someone who believed in fairness and accountability, he struggled with the idea that his work might be perceived as part of a flawed system. Yet instead of retreating into doubt, he chose to engage further. He began collaborating with experts in criminal psychology, sociology, and policy reform, seeking ways to address the root causes of such behavior. Poverty, inequality, lack of access to education, these were issues that fueled desperation and resentment, providing fertile ground for groups like this one to thrive. If society wanted lasting change, it needed to tackle these problems head-on. At home, the couple found solace in small moments of normalcy. They cooked meals together, watched movies cuddled up on the couch, and took long walks through the snowy streets. These routines helped ground them, reminding them of the life they were fighting to protect. Still, fear lingered in subtle ways. The sound of footsteps outside their door made her tense. A knock at the window sent his heart racing. Even in crowded places, they remained vigilant, scanning faces for signs of danger. Nightmares persisted, though less frequently now, leaving them exhausted but grateful for mornings when they woke up safe. Despite these lingering anxieties, they refused to let fear dictate their lives. Instead, they channeled their energy into helping others. The injured woman joined support groups for survivors of violent crimes, offering guidance and encouragement to those navigating similar journeys. Her husband worked closely with advocacy, organizations pushing for policies that prioritized victim protection and rehabilitation for offenders. Together, they turned their pain into action, using their experience to create positive change. One evening, after returning from a particularly emotional support group meeting, the injured woman sat by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames. Her husband joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "You okay?" he asked softly, noticing the distant look in her eyes. She hesitated before responding. "I keep thinking about all the people we've met," she said finally. "So many stories, so much pain. How do we make sure it stops?" He didn't have an immediate answer. The question weighed heavily on both of them, echoing the uncertainty they'd carried since the attack. But as they sat in silence, the crackling fire filling the room with warmth, they realized something important. They couldn't fix everything. What they could do was focus on what was within their control, supporting each other, advocating for justice, and inspiring hope in others. Their resolve strengthened when news broke of another arrest, a high-ranking member of the organization. This individual had played a crucial role in coordinating the attacks, including the one at the restaurant. Investigators described them as cold and calculating, someone who viewed violence as a necessary tool for their cause. Hearing this description sent chills down their spines, but it also reinforced their determination to see justice served. Court proceedings began shortly afterward, drawing widespread media coverage. The courtroom buzzed with tension as victims, families, and advocates gathered to witness the trial. For the injured woman, testifying was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. facing the accused, recounting the details of the attack, reliving the trauma. It all felt like reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. But she knew her testimony mattered. It wasn't just about holding one person accountable. It was about sending a message that violence would not be tolerated. Her husband stood by her side throughout the process, offering quiet reassurance whenever she faltered. After her testimony, reporters swarmed them, eager for quotes and reactions. Instead of engaging directly, they released a joint statement emphasizing the importance of systemic reform. Justice isn't just about punishment, it read. It's about creating a world where acts like these become unthinkable. As the trial progressed, more victims came forward, sharing their stories and demanding accountability. Their voices added weight to the case, highlighting the far-reaching impact of the organization's actions. For the injured woman, hearing these testimonies was both heartbreaking and empowering. She saw herself in their struggles, the same fears, the same doubts, the same desire for healing. It reminded her why she had chosen to speak out in the first place. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it hints of renewal, the couple felt a cautious sense of optimism. The arrests and trials marked progress, but they knew the fight was far from over. Rooting out the organization completely would take time, and addressing the underlying issues that allowed it to exist would require sustained effort. Still, they found comfort in knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves, a movement toward justice, compassion, and change. On a crisp spring morning, they took a walk through the park, enjoying the sight of blossoming trees and chirping birds. For the first time in months, they felt a glimmer of peace. Life hadn't returned to normal, and perhaps it never would. But they had adapted. They learned to find joy in simple moments, cherishing each day as a gift. Because even in the face of unimaginable adversity, they had discovered something powerful, the strength to keep moving forward, together. By the time spring settled in, the city had shed its winter coat, revealing vibrant colors and a renewed sense of energy. The injured woman and her husband found themselves walking through this awakening world with cautious optimism. Life still carried its share of challenges, but there were moments now, small yet significant, that reminded them of what it meant to live fully again. The court case against the shadowy organization was nearing its conclusion. Days spent in the courtroom were emotionally draining, as victims recounted their harrowing experiences and prosecutors laid out evidence piece by piece. Each testimony painted a vivid picture of lives shattered by calculated violence. For the injured woman sitting among these survivors brought both heartache and solidarity. She saw reflections of her own journey in their stories, the pain, the fear, the slow climb toward healing. Yet she also saw resilience. These individuals weren't just victims. They were fighters, determined to reclaim their voices and demand accountability. Her own testimony had been one of the hardest things she'd ever done. Standing in front of the accused, reliving the attack in detail, felt like stepping back into that restaurant all over again. Her voice trembled at times and tears welled up uncontrollably, but she pushed through. Her husband sat in the front row, his steady gaze offering silent support. When she finished speaking, the room fell silent for a moment before applause broke out, a quiet acknowledgement of her courage. It wasn't easy, but she knew her words mattered. They weren't just for herself. They were for everyone who had suffered because of this group's actions. As the trial progressed, investigators uncovered even more disturbing details about the organization's operations. Documents revealed intricate plans targeting not only high-profile figures but also ordinary citizens caught in the crossfire. Their goal wasn't just to instill fear, it was to create chaos, exploiting societal divisions to further their agenda. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community, prompting calls for systemic reforms. People began questioning how such groups could exist undetected for so long, and what could be done to prevent future attacks. For the judge, these findings reinforced his belief that true justice went beyond punishing individuals. It required addressing the root causes that allowed such ideologies to take hold. He threw himself into advocacy work, collaborating with lawmakers, educators, and social workers to develop programs aimed at tackling poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity. His efforts earned him praise from some quarters, while others criticized him for straying too far from traditional legal roles. But he didn't care about the backlash. What mattered most was ensuring that tragedies like this wouldn't happen. Again, at home, the couple continued to navigate their new reality together. The injured woman's scars had become a permanent part of her appearance, though she no longer viewed them with shame. Instead, she saw them as symbols of survival, a reminder of everything she had endured and overcome. Friends and family noticed a change in her demeanor. She laughed more freely now, engaged in conversations without hesitation, and embraced life with a quiet confidence that inspired those around her. Her public speaking engagements became less frequent but more impactful. She focused on smaller, intimate settings where she could connect deeply with audiences. One event stood out in particular, a gathering of young women recovering from trauma. As she shared her story, she encouraged them to find strength in vulnerability, to lean on each other during tough times, and to never let anyone define their worth. By the end of the session, several attendees approached her, thanking her for giving them hope. These interactions reminded her why she had chosen to speak out, to show others that healing was possible, even after unimaginable pain. Her husband, meanwhile, balanced his advocacy work with supporting her recovery. On weekends, they often escaped the city, driving to nearby parks or countryside spots where they could breathe fresh air and leave behind the weight of their responsibilities. These trips became sacred rituals, allowing them to reconnect with nature and with each other. During one such outing, they stumbled upon a field of wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. They lay down side by side, watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. For a brief moment, everything else faded away, leaving only peace. Still, shadows lingered. Nightmares occasionally jolted them awake, and certain triggers, like hearing raised voices in public, sent waves of anxiety coursing through them. But instead of letting these moments derail them, they leaned on each other for comfort. They talked openly about their fears, acknowledging that healing wasn't linear. Some days were harder than others, but they faced them together hand in hand. One evening, as they prepared dinner, the injured woman paused mid-chop, staring thoughtfully at the knife in her hand. "Do you think we'll ever feel completely safe again?" she asked quietly. Her husband set down his spoon and turned to face her. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know we're safer now than we were before. We've fought hard to get here, and we'll keep fighting." His words resonated with her. Safety wasn't something you achieved once and then forgot about. It was something you worked toward every day. And while the road ahead might still hold uncertainties, they had built a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever came next. As summer approached, bringing longer days and warmer nights, the couple reflected on how far they'd come. The trial had concluded, with guilty verdicts handed down to several key members of the organization. While closure remained elusive, knowing that justice had been served provided a measure of relief. More importantly, their advocacy efforts had sparked meaningful conversations about reform, inspiring others to join the fight for a better future. They celebrated small victories along the way. Her first solo outing without feeling self-conscious, his successful push for a new policy initiative, the countless messages of gratitude from people whose lives they had touched. These moments reminded them that even in darkness, light could shine through, if you chose to seek it. On a warm June evening, they stood on their balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The city buzzed with life below, but up here it felt peaceful. "We made it this far," she said softly, leaning into him. "And we'll keep going," he replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Together, they gazed at the stars emerging in the twilight sky, symbols of hope amid the vast unknown. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side, drawing strength from the love and resilience that had carried them this far. As summer rolled on, the couple found themselves settling into a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy. It wasn't the same normal they had known before the attack. Life had been forever altered, but it was a new kind of balance, one built on resilience and shared purpose. The days were filled with small joys: morning coffee together, walks in the park, laughter over shared meals. These moments weren't just routines. They were anchors, grounding them in the present and reminding them of what truly mattered. Key. Trial's conclusion brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was relief, knowing that those responsible for the attacks would face consequences. On the other hand, there was an awareness that justice couldn't undo the pain or erase the scars. The injured woman often thought about this as she went about her day. She realized that closure wasn't something you could fully achieve. It wasn't a finish line you crossed. Instead, it was a process, a gradual acceptance of what had happened and a commitment to moving forward. Her advocacy work continued to grow, but it evolved in unexpected ways. While she still spoke publicly at events, she began focusing more on creating safe spaces for survivors. She partnered with local organizations to host workshops where people could share their stories without judgment. These gatherings became powerful reminders of the strength found in community. One participant described it as a room full of broken pieces coming together to form something whole. That phrase stuck with her, encapsulating everything she hoped to accomplish. Her husband remained deeply involved in policy reform, working tirelessly to address the systemic issues that allowed groups like the shadowy organization to thrive. He collaborated with lawmakers, educators, and grassroots activists, pushing for changes that prioritized prevention over punishment. His efforts weren't always met with enthusiasm. Some dismissed his ideas as idealistic or impractical, but he persisted, driven by the belief that true justice required long-term solutions. Together, they inspired each other, their individual missions complementing one another in meaningful ways. Despite their progress, fear still lingered in quiet corners. Certain triggers, the sound of footsteps echoing in an empty hallway, the sight of someone carrying a tray in a crowded restaurant, could send waves of anxiety coursing through them. But instead of letting these moments control them, they learned to navigate them together. They talked openly about their fears, acknowledging that healing wasn't linear. Some nights sleep eluded them and they lay awake holding hands in silence. Other nights they dreamed peacefully, waking up grateful for another day ahead. One afternoon, while browsing through old photo albums, the injured woman paused at a picture taken years ago. In it, she stood smiling brightly, her face unmarked by scars. For a moment, sadness washed over her, not because she missed who she used to be, but because she wished she could tell that version of herself how strong she'd become. Her husband noticed the look on her face and sat beside her. "You're still the same person," he said gently. "Just stronger." His words stayed with her, resonating deeply. Strength wasn't about erasing the past or pretending it didn't exist. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to build a better future. This realization gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She decided to document her journey, not just for herself, but for others who might feel lost in their own struggles. Writing became a form of therapy, allowing her to process her experiences while offering guidance to those walking similar paths. By late summer, their lives had transformed in ways they never anticipated. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were advocates, leaders, and inspirations to others. Their story spread beyond their immediate circle, reaching people across the country. Strangers reached out to thank them for their courage, sharing how their efforts had sparked hope in dark times. These messages reminded them that even the smallest actions could create ripples of change. On a warm August evening, they attended a community event celebrating resilience and recovery. The air buzzed with energy as survivors, supporters, and advocates gathered to honor one another's journeys. When the injured woman took the stage to speak, the crowd erupted in applause. Her voice carried conviction as she shared her story, not shying away from the pain but emphasizing the power of perseverance. "We may carry scars," she said, pausing to let her words sink in, "but they don't define us. What defines us is how we choose to move forward." Her speech ended with a standing ovation, tears streaming down faces throughout the room. As she stepped off the stage, her husband greeted her with a hug, pride shining in his eyes. Later that night, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, they reflected on how far they'd come. Life hadn't returned to normal, and perhaps it never would, but they had adapted. They had turned tragedy into purpose, pain into strength, and despair into hope. In the months that followed, they continued their work, knowing the fight for justice and healing was far from over. They faced challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but they also celebrated victories, big and small. Each step forward reinforced their belief that no matter how dark things seemed, light could always shine through if you chose to seek it. As autumn approached, painting the city in hues of gold and crimson, the couple stood on their balcony once, again watching the sun set behind the skyline. "Do you think we'll ever stop feeling like we're fighting?" she asked softly. He smiled, squeezing her hand. "Maybe not," he replied. "But I think that's okay. Fighting doesn't mean we're weak. It means we're strong enough to keep going." And so they did. Hand in hand, they embraced whatever came next, drawing strength from the love and resilience that had carried them this far. Their journey wasn't perfect, nor was it easy, but it was theirs, a testament to the power of courage, connection, and unwavering determination.